If a horror movie exists, chances are there is a remake or reboot either already out, in development, or planned for the future. Let's face it, studios know that we're gonna watch these whether we throw shade at them or not. And also, let's not kid ourselves. Oftentimes these remakes are just not good, are hilarious, or just missing the original heart and soul of the film. So much so that the horror movie remake slash reboot is stigmatized to the point that more often than not, they are written off before even being released.
This won't hurt one little bit.
And honestly, I think that kind of sucks because either they were critically panned or forgotten to time, but there's quite a few different horror movie remakes slash reboots out there that I definitely feel are gems. So today we are going to take a look at some horror movie remakes slash reboots you may think are crap, but are actually pretty good. If you've been coming to my channel for any length of time, you know that myself and most of my friends are really big horror movie fans. So today we're going to be joined by my buddies Steady and Themgrir, who you've most likely seen on the various Off the Cuffs, as we collaborate and discuss some of our favorite horror remakes slash reboots. Now, we've done our best to stay away from the really obvious good remakes slash reboots that are out there. However, there may be a few in here that, although got some praise, aren't nearly talked about enough. Now, with the horror movie remakes slash reboots that myself, Themgrir, and Rexsteady are going to be talking about today, we've decided to not put them in any particular order. However, what I will challenge you to do is if you find any of these looking even a little bit interesting, I would actually recommend going and checking them out because these are worth giving a shot. These are the 10 horror movie remakes slash reboots that are better than you might think.
It's pickle time.
Jade, pal!
Nobody hurts my best buddy.
I wanted to start this out with a joke. I couldn't think of anything, so let's just do it. My Bloody Valentine from 2009, a remake of the original 1981 slasher flick. 61% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5.4 on IMDb. Movie had a pretty good cast and a very good premise, essentially. Just, nut job in a gas mask, hacking at people on Valentine's Day for some reason. So, double holiday. When the movie first came out, maybe this is just totally anecdotal, but I remember people just shitting on this movie. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's really, really fun. It is a fun movie. There's some genuine, drama, charisma between the characters. Jensen Ackles, throwing that out there, if there's any other reason to watch the movie, it's for Dean fucking Winchester. Yeah, seriously, this movie, it suffers a little bit from the fact that it is intended to be a 3D movie, so you had that kind of, funny little gimmick of stuff flying towards the camera with the purposes of it when you're wearing the 3D glasses for it to kind of jump out at you. But this movie did not deserve the hate that it got, because there are some genuinely gripping moments, and they really did a fantastic job with playing with the idea that, oh, you know who the killer is, but do you? Yeah, you do. But the first time you watch it, at least you get to have that moment of experiencing of oh no, is it actually the guy that we think it is? Is that too obvious? Is it not obvious enough? What the fuck's happening here? That's my first pick.
Hi guys, Themgrir. My first movie is going to be The WolfMan. And this is going to be take one. Hopefully the only take. WolfMan, 2010. Rotten Tomatoes score 33%. IMDb 5.8 out of 10. In 1891, Bell Talbot is murdered by a wolf-like creature, and his brother, a Shakespearean, as a huge star-studded cast. We have Benicio del Toro as Lawrence Talbot, the Shakespearean actor. If you don't know Benicio del Toro, for all of you MCU fans, The Collector. That's him. That's Benicio del Toro. Anthony Hopkins. You know the one. We also have Hugo Weaving. Hugo Weaving's in it. So with a star-studded cast like this, how can you go wrong? 33% and 5.8? Are you fucking kidding me? Not with all these people. I don't remember many of my friends liking this movie when it came out, and I don't think it deserved such a low score. Like I said, the effects were great. The director, Joe Johnston, who already had great movies under his belt, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Rocketeer, and then the year after he did Wolfman, he did Captain America, the First Avenger. So even he went to the MCU. So this was like a jumping off point for characters going into the MCU. We got Benicio del Toro and Joe Johnston moving on to Marvel.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003. IMDb 6.2, Rotten Tomatoes 37%. Surprisingly, the Michael Bay produced horror movies aren't as bad as most people think. And yes, that also does include quite a few of the different Platinum Dunes films.
You're platinum, you're a rock star.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 starred a young Jessica Biel in a pretty much shot-for-shot remake of the original. In fairness, it's not a complete shot-for-shot remake like the 1998 Psycho remake, but a lot of the same camera angles and shots were used from the original movie. There is also certain liberties taken that differs from the original movie. This makes Texas Chainsaw 2003 more of a reboot than like a straight remake. However, while watching this, you can tell that everyone involved had a love for the original. The effects are great, and despite using a lot of the same camera angles from the OG Chainsaw Massacre, they act more like homages to the original rather than straight ripoffs. And the performances are all very well done. Some performances, sure, are over the top, but the original carried the same vibe. If there's one major criticism that I can give the movie, it's that the whole thing has like a really clean vibe to it. And what I mean by clean isn't necessarily the gore or anything like that, because there is definitely gore and violence in the film, but when you watch the original Chainsaw Massacre, there's this sort of grimy, dirty feel to it, something that's lost on the 2003 version. This definitely has the feeling of like a mid-2000s movie, for better or for worse. However, I still think it stands on its own and is worth giving a watch.
Let Me In, a 7 out of 10 on IMDb, an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. Technically, in my opinion, really stretching the line between what a remake actually is. Because the original movie itself, based off of a novel adaptation made in 2008 called Let the Right One In. Very good film. And the 2010 remake, for lack of a better term, was essentially just a shot-for-shot carbon copy of the original. There's a couple things that were removed, probably mostly for propriety's sake, because, you know, even if it's a doll, you probably can't show a child's crotch, even if the child is a 200-something-year-old vampire, still physically 11 or 12 years old. That's really all there is to it. But the movie in and of itself kind of walks down a very strange line between the dangers of neglected children. There's a lot of symbolism in there. If you watch the director's commentary for it, it's really interesting how he put a lot of his own childhood trauma and a lot of extra little things in there to kind of help bring this character to life, flesh out what it's like being a kid going through your parents' divorce and essentially leaning on a friend really hard. Meanwhile, you're getting bullied at school. Largely, this movie did not get as bad a reviews now, but at the time of it, I swear to God, as it was released, every single movie buff friend that I had was like, oh, it's just a shot-for-shot remake of a Swedish film that's really better. No, it's not. No, it's not. I would say they are on par with each other for very different reasons.
Evil Dead 2016. IMDb scored it at 6.5 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes scored it at 63%. Now, overall, that was kind of middling. Not too bad, but also not that great. I'm a original trilogy of the Evil Dead. I say trilogy, but you can argue that it was literally only 2 movies because, let's face it, Evil Dead 2 was technically a remake. So the movie already got a remake. But I can't talk about that one because that one was really good and everyone loved it. Plus, it was the jumping off point for Army of Darkness, and that was a fantastic movie. Let's just face it. Favorite horror movies. I love the first one where it was the more serious tone. I loved the second one where they took a more comedic, kind of almost black comedy tone to it, which worked wonders for Army of Darkness. Alvarez, I think is his name, who was also the director of this remake. So when I realized that Raimi's name was really only on it just because it was based on his original screenplay, I was a little put off, not to mention no Ash? No fucking Ash? That's the cornerstone of the movie right there. But I was such a huge fan of the originals that I had to give it a shot. Our main character, Mia, and her brother, David, I think is his name in the movie, it was a little weird to have a bad thing. She did a fantastic job. And overall, I really fucking enjoyed the movie. Changed enough to make it something new, much like how Evil Dead changed just enough to make it something new, even though it is literally the exact same fucking movie. You could argue that this remake is also exact same thing. We get, you know, some homage shots of like I like how they kept the original like camera flying through the woods to signify the evil that's moving in towards the cabin. I loved that they kept the original scene with the tree. You know the one. Yeah, that one. Plus, maybe to appease fans, we got Ellen Sandweiss as Cheryl, and then we had Bruce Campbell as an uncredited role as Ash, who, if you've seen the movie, we do get to see a quick little snippet of him at the end. Given that 1 and 2 of the original were technically the same movie, and 2 was only made so that it could have a direct sequel in Army of Darkness, or at least that's how I see it, I view this one as more of a continuation of the first one, whereas the second one and Army of Darkness are in themselves contained. Sure, there's no real evidence that this is the case, but this is my own little headcanon. The movie ends in this just amazing Slayer raining blood effect, almost fight. And honestly, that was my favorite part. And I kind of wish that they would have had Raining Blood as the background music in it, because I think it would have made it even more perfect. But that's just my opinion. Again, not bad, not great, somewhere in the middle, but definitely deserves a lot more love than what it got.
The Fog remake. IMDb 3.7, Rotten Tomatoes 4%. I'm a sucker for all things John Carpenter, with many of his films being some of my all-time favorites, and that may or may not be a hint of other picks that may come up on this list.
Shit the bed!
Even some of his smaller gems are classics in my eyes, like Prince of Darkness and the topic for this section, The Fog. This remake came out right in the middle of the 2000s horror remake era, where studios were pumping out tons of classic horror movie remakes. Now, The Fog 2005 basically follows the original plot of the movie. A fog rolls into town, and within that fog, zombie ghost-like beings start killing off the townfolk. If you haven't seen this or the original film, I won't spoil why. The original Fog didn't reinvent the slasher wheel or anything like that. It was a competent horror movie, and the 2005 remake basically follows suit. Which, funny enough, I actually saw this first, and it inspired me to go back and watch the original. I did want to touch a little bit more on the Rotten Tomatoes score, which I feel is grossly unjustified. Their review simply states it's a so-so horror remake that doesn't try anything new. So it gets a 7%. Once again, another reason to think for yourself rather than trusting arbitrary scores. This movie doesn't top the original, but it served as more or less a gateway. And even after watching the original, this still remains a decent remake in its own right, which contains a lot of really good atmosphere that made the original so good. And if anything, it stars the guy who played Superman in Smallville, so you can at least pretend that it's canonical with that.
Prom Night. This one only has a 7% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 3.9 on IMDb, and doesn't even have a Metacritic rating on here front and center. It's a 1 out of 5 on Common Sense Media. Ugh. I don't know why there were so many early 2000s horror movie remakes. It seems like we're following the same beat every 10 years or so. There's either a continuation, adaptation, or remake of one of the classics from either the 1980s or earlier, so far back as to the 50s or so. There's something missing from slasher movies that I think was really, really heavily well represented in this particular film. And that's, slasher movies have a tendency to go one of two ways. Either it's an investigative thing of you following along with like the detectives who are trying to slowly catch this guy. But I'm gonna be honest with you, this one really, really kind of reminds me of Halloween. You know who the guy is, but the difference between Michael Myers and this guy is you actually get to peek into some of the emotional shit that's going on in this guy's head. He genuinely believes he's in love with this teenager that he used to be the teacher for. He is delusional, he is fucked in the head, and he will do literally anything so far as to just slaughter strangers on the off chance that he can run away with this girl who he is convinced is also in love with him too. It is a wild fucking ride, and even though the movie itself only takes place over the course of like 3 hours of actual time, the amount that they can pack into that is pretty amazing. This movie's a fun one. I would really recommend checking it out. Almost more so than the other two, because you've probably heard of My Bloody Valentine, you've probably heard of Let Me In, but Prom Night, probably not. So I think that one's my favorite pick for horror movie remakes that got more shit than they deserved. Rec Steady, I don't care if you like, share, or subscribe. Go fuck yourself. Thanks for having me on, by the way, Nick. Like, share, and subscribe to him.
MTV's Scream, IMDb 7.1, Rotten Tomatoes 61%. Funny enough, the scoring overall is favorable for this show, and it still does have a cult audience. However, most people I've talked to have heard of this show, but have never actually watched it. The biggest problem with this one is honestly just the branding. It's MTV Scream, and this is MTV in like 2015. Immediately after seeing this, I, like many others, dismissed this show, and I dismissed it for many years. However, that was a mistake. The show follows the basic plot of the movies, a meta horror show where a killer is attempting to murder residents of the town. What follows is 2 seasons of plot twists, drama, and intrigue. I honestly can't do justice as to how good of a show this actually is. Characters who you absolutely loathe in the beginning of the show grow on you to the point where you're rooting for them not to die in the show. Speaking of things you wouldn't expect, some of the characters that you wouldn't think die actually do, and some of the plot twists, while coming out of nowhere, do fit in with the show's narrative. Namely, Season 2's ending will have you go, holy shit, since it flawlessly connects into Season 1. The show was eventually canceled, but not after getting one final send-off movie, which acted as a standalone sort of film. Technically, and in fairness, there is Scream Resurrection, which is technically a season 3, but I've never watched it, but from what I'm also hearing is that it has nothing to do with the original 2 seasons, so I really could care less. The only real complaint I have is the design of Ghostface. I'm very partial to the OG Ghostface since Scream is one of my all-time favorite movies. And the Ghostface, I don't know, this thing just looks kind of off to me. It never really clicked well. I appreciate that they wanted to do something different and wanted a design that would be their own, but I think it should have been more classic looking. Also, I know that for season 3 or Scream Resurrection, they did bring back the OG Ghostface mask, but again, I've never seen the show. Regardless, this gets my highest recommendation for not only a remake, but as a standalone in general.
And everyone is fair game.
Friday the 13th, 2009. IMDb scored it at 5.5 out of 10, 46% Rotten Tomatoes. First and foremost, when your lead is Sam fucking Winchester, you know you're in for some fun. And you know he's gonna live through the movie because it's Sam fucking Winchester. Now, the one thing that I liked about this remake, and I almost hesitate to say remake, and I feel like I'm kind of cheating with this one, because it's like that kind of in-between where it's more of a sequel, but it's also a remake, because it is, the way that they set it up is it's a direct sequel to the first one. Jason wasn't even technically alive until that last ending scene where he jumps out of the water and grabs the surviving girl. We all know, fans of the originals, that his mom was the killer in the first one. It had nothing to do with Jason. And then in the second one was the bag face, so we didn't even get the hockey mask until the third film. So that iconic Jason look, we didn't get to the third film. So I kind of, much like the headcanon of my Evil Dead stuff, this one is a remake of the second movie. This is a sequel to the first, but still a remake. Essentially, in the 1980s, they still had all those killings that the mother did, blah, blah, blah. And this is 30 years later after the deaths in the 1980s. Some kids end up camping near Crystal Lake because they find a bunch of weed there, the devil's lettuce. They're gonna get some of that devil's lettuce. And they're all killed, except one girl, who just happens to look like Jason's mother when she was younger. Well, when your brother, Sam Winchester, Clay Miller in this, he's Clay Miller in this. Clay Miller starts looking for his sister, and, you know, everybody that he talks to is like, oh, she's dead, or the police are like, oh, she went off with her boyfriend, there's nothing, but he knows better, because he's a Winchester. I mean a Miller. He is a Miller, and Millers know better. Ends up meeting up with these other kids who are staying in a cabin on the lake, but not necessarily at Camp Crystal Lake, but they're still on the lake. And, of course, they all start dying. Those motherfuckers start dying. Jason does his best. Frankly, with these old slasher flicks, I feel like the remakes of them, and this goes for all of them. The remake for Nightmare on Elm Street, the remakes for Halloween, Friday the 13th ones, just about any of them, especially if they're ones from like the 80s. I feel like the only reason they don't do well is because they don't live up to people's nostalgia. A lot of those people were 30 years younger when they saw those movies originally, and then they see this one and it's like, oh, it's not the same, blah, 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 blah. And honestly, I think that's kind of what happened here. Because at its core, it's a great slasher flick. The kills are amazing. They're fun. It goes to all the tropes, and maybe that's why a lot of people don't like it, because it's 2009. You shouldn't be using those same tropes that we used in the 80s. But they're tried and true. And I'm sorry. Some of the kills were great. There was one in there where he takes a bow and arrow and just shoots the guy in the face while he's driving a boat. That's fucking dope. How cool is that? Come on. It's just got great kills. The whole sub-story about how the one girl kind of looks like his mother, and that's what they use to stop him, you know. It almost is kind of like the Friday the 13th game, where in it you can dress up one of the female characters if you find the sweater and some other stuff, and you can use it to basically stun Jason so that you can kill him in the game. But all in all, this is a retelling that kind of wipes away all of the previous sequels. Thank God, because going to hell and then going to space, this guy had tapped out. Like, where else can you go after space, especially after you've already escaped the clutches of hell? Where can you go? Which is why I like this remake, because it does away with all of that. Sure, we still have a little bit of supernatural. First movie, he's technically dead. He jumps out of the lake. That motherfucker drowned. How'd he jump out of the lake? So we still have that supernatural aspect, but not so crazy as to escape hell or go to space. But you know what? People didn't really like it. But I did, because of Sam Winchester.
Halloween 2007, IMDb 6.1, Rotten Tomatoes 28%. I'm gonna be real with everybody. This one actually holds a real special place in my heart. The original Halloween is up there as one of my all-time favorite movies. This, Nightmare 3, and Scream were some of the first horror movies that I've ever watched, with the original Halloween being one of the first movies that I ever personally went to rent myself. So fast forward to 2007, and I was hyped for one of my all-time favorite performers, Rob Zombie, to remake one of my all-time favorite movies. I liked House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, so my expectations were high, and I wasn't disappointed. Personally, I don't care what anyone says. This movie is a classic in its own right. I look at this as kind of the Final Fantasy VII remake of horror movies. It's true to the original, but it's also its own thing. Yes, I do understand that one of the biggest criticism that it has is that it humanizes Michael Myers. Honestly though, I think the film did an excellent job in showing why he would become a ruthless monster. His journey from boy to the shape, I thought worked amazing. Malcolm McDowell filling the role left behind by Donald Pleasance was no easy task, but I think he fits snug like a glove. I seriously love this movie. Now, in fairness, I understand a lot of the criticisms, and I think some of them are justified. I too prefer Michael Myers being more mysterious and less of a developed character, but that still doesn't take anything away from how good this movie was. The performances, excellent. The story, excellent. The remix of the Halloween theme, excellent. I don't mind defending this film. A lot of love went into making this, and I respect what Rob Zombie was trying to do here. I will quickly mention part 2 because that's where this reboot series did unfortunately lose me. The opening, which is a homage to Halloween 2, is great, but then goes downhill fast, literally almost 2 seconds after that. Funny enough, Themgrir and I actually saw this in theaters and thought it would have been a better Friday the 13th film with all the mommy drama. But that was almost a decade ago, and you can't change that now. Take nothing away from part 1 though. It's a horror classic in its own right. If you haven't watched it since its release, do yourself a favor and go watch it. Like I said earlier, this is the Final Fantasy VII remake of horror movies in my opinion. The OG will always still be there, and if you go into it with fresh set of eyes and an open mind, you'll find it is a gem that deserves some love and attention. So that was our 10 horror remakes slash reboots that are probably better than you're thinking, and I want to give a quick shout out to Rex Steady as well as Themgrir, and thank them for taking the time to come on my channel and talk about some of their favorite remakes and reboots for horror movies, because God knows there's a fuck ton of them. And if you guys liked this, definitely let us know in the comments below, and maybe we'll do another one of these in the future. But make sure to go check out Themgrir as well as Rexsteady. I have their information linked below, so you guys can go check them out, like all their shit, and sub to them because they make great content. Anyway, make sure to keep things light and rebellious, and I'll see you guys next time.